Today is August 9th, 2022. I'm here with Vivian Price for the VE collection. I'm Diane Barrett, and I welcome you, Vivian, to our collection. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Anytime. I could see from researching your life, so to speak, you've had a lot of very significant endeavors. Your career has taken so many routes.
I think that's what's interesting about me.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk about that for our record to acknowledge the careers that you would like us to put down on your
Factory worker, electrician, professor, filmmaker, activist.
Which one of those would you like to start with?
Maybe chronologically.
Okay.
Would be good. And so just to say a little bit about who I am. I was raised in a family of people who were refugees from Vienna, from Hitler's invasion of Vienna. My family was Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
and they came here in 1939. And so,
when you say they, how many people?
my parents and my brother,
Mm-hmm.
were 7 months old, and a few other people made it. Some didn't, from the broader family. And so the Holocaust and injustice was part of our everyday fabric of our world. And I think that influenced me. I mean, it definitely did influence me. Not everybody who has that background ends up the same way, but the way it influenced me was, also my generation. I was raised in the 60s and got active in the anti-war movement and the women's movement and the lesbian gay movement. Just really trying to seek change, social change, and fight injustice. And that's where I started working. And I finished college. I studied archaeology and then got my master's in history. And it was a recession.
And where was that? Where did you go to college?
I went to college at Bryn Mawr College, which was a kind of a bad fit for me. I wanted to go to Sarah Lawrence, and
right.
I was a writer as a teenager, and even published a short story.
Did you? Great.
One of my photographs that I sent you was from Ingenue magazine, but my parents were concerned I wouldn't be able to make a living as a writer, so they wanted me to do something more practical, and they thought archaeology was a better idea.
They did?
Yeah, they were. My parents didn't go to college, and they didn't know really, but they were hopeful, that it involved, international travel, it involved understanding the world.
Right.
And I went on to study history. I got interested in the Middle East and in questioning Israel and fighting, the effects of apartheid in Israel, and I studied Arabic. And
were your parents activists?
No.
No.
In fact, they shunned activism.
Was that because of the Holocaust?
They were. I mean, I think they both were from middle class backgrounds, and it wasn't really that wasn't the way they responded to the world.
Right.
But my mother was a fighter,
Mm-hmm.
and she believed in standing up for herself and that her children should stand up for themselves. My father was more easygoing, but I think I inherited that assertiveness from my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I finished college, when I finished my master's degree, I wasn't sure what to do next, and I ended up deciding that I would organize in factories, and I got involved in, political activism and union organizing in factories. And
so your factory work was before you went to college?
Right after I went to college.
What kind of work did you do in the factory?
I started in a pharmaceutical plant, making IV drug band holders and the bottles of fluid that people use in hospitals. And I got my first firing was because I spoke up at a safety meeting when they were saying that the supervisor used that as a way to badger people about issues in quality control. And he was saying, why are there so many bad bottles being passed through the assembly line? And I raised my hand and I said, the line's going too fast. Slow it down so we can pay attention. I got fired for that.
Did you?
Yes. And then I worked in a steel mill and pretty heavy jobs. The time when women first started getting into the trades and into non-traditional jobs so it was right when the Black freedom movement and the women's movement were challenging exclusion of our groups from the good paying union jobs. So my first job there was through affirmative action. It was through forcing the steel plants to open up to people of color and women. So I worked in a steel plant for about 5 months and I got fired right before probation because the only bathroom they had in my area was a men's bathroom. And I was in the men's bathroom and they fired me for being in the men's bathroom.
Really?
Yeah.
They were looking to fire you, don't you think?
Oh yeah.
Right. They just used that.
They just use it.
Well, so where were you supposed to go to the bathroom? At home?
Well, no, I could have gone to another. It was break time. I mean, this was the only place we were working outside, dipping these iron transmission timbers into the galvanizing vats. And it was cold and all of the rest of the crew were men. So in between dipping batches, we used to go to the ante room of the men's bathroom and hang out. And that's where I was fired for being there. So it was not actually about being in the bathroom. It was like doing what everybody else was doing.
Oh, you were in the men's space.
Yes. And which happened to be the bathroom. And it was before probation. So I wasn't a union member yet. They couldn't defend me.
Were you aware of your sexuality, of your sexual preference at that time?
It's probable that I appeared to be a lesbian. I mean, I'm.
How about you yourself?
So it's a good question. I've like this morning I got called sir.
Right.
I think it's easy for people to, think of me as androgynous, but on the other hand, I kind of pass as a, femme lesbian, which means that, I kind of have to really assert my sexuality for people to know that I'm a lesbian. And when I worked in the factories, I started doing that, but I also went through bisexual period. So, and this was my bisexual period. So I think my first.
What did you do this morning when that person called you sir?
I
don't know how to react to that.
I just waited until my turn. She was being nice. She said, "I'll be with you in a minute, sir." And I said, "Okay." And pretty soon, I think she figured it out. And it was not an intentional, or malicious comment.
It's confusing, isn't it?
It can be.
Yeah. But nothing we're going to change.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes if people come at you, like, if homophobia, I do believe in fighting homophobia and misidentification, but it really depends on the context.
Right.
And I'll just say too that I came out as a lesbian off and on, starting at the age of 16.
Mhm.
I had my first lesbian relationship. I fell in love with a woman. We, basically were, kissing and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But it was a time when that was considered a mental illness, and it was really rough. It was a really rough time. This is like 1964, something like that. And we used to go to gay bars. I ditched school and we go to gay bars in the village, Greenwich Village.
Where were you living at that time?
I was living in Queens with
Still in
my
New York.
family.
Mhm.
And I really didn't know much about. I looked it up, like what is being a
Good.
lesbian, and
Uh-huh.
uh, and my friend was like, don't worry about it.
Just do it.
She was the same age as me, and
Uh-huh.
but at any rate, my parents, my mother found out because she wrote me letters, and my mother found the letters, and my mother threatened to send me to a mental hospital.
Mhm.
And so we just went underground. It was all secret. We just met secretly, and that was hard too. And it was
Yeah.
hard. And she was this my first, you know, crush, I'd say,
Mhm.
was she had her problems. She was dealing with the death of her mother, and she was sniffing glue and cutting herself. I mean,
Wow.
so I went to a guidance counselor to try to ask for help, and they wanted to send me to a therapist, and my mother said absolutely not.
Right.
So anyway, I went back in the closet after.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
So you're about 17 then?
Yeah. So I when I graduated from college, from high school, I went back in the closet, and I um kind of tried to be a straight person, dated men,
Mhm.
and never really found a relationship that I was interested in, and nothing really worked out. Didn't Anyway, so
It doesn't because you're a lesbian.
yeah. Well,
I mean, it's
yeah,
how
I
you
mean,
try to make it work.
yeah.
Is that big part of you? It's who you are, who we are.
I mean, I do think that there are people who could be bisexual, and I think that's possible, but I think my outlook is also, politically, that it's hard for men to be feminists, and I
Mhm.
don't think I could deal with a man who wasn't a, wasn't gay.
Right. Right. It wasn't a woman either.
Yeah,
Two, two strikes there.
yeah, there you go.
I
Um,
remember being in college and the sociology instructor, for some reason, was talking about feminists. And he said, I'm a feminist. I thought, no way, But of course, I was afraid to say anything to him. Eventually, I did say, can you explain that? That was a mistake, of course. But
well, I kind of have a different approach. I mean, I do think that there are men who can act on their views,
mhm.
and but it's like racism. We always have to be thoughtful and conscious and intentional in how we act. And I think all white folks are racist too, but because we live in a racist society, a racist, a sexist society, I mean, I think we have internal homophobia. We're all attempting, to find ways to be open, and some people are not, right? Maybe some people are. That's not everybody is, but I don't think that a man who says he's a feminist is just full of shit. I think it depends. Let's see it.
Mhm.
Uh, so I guess to pick up the thread, I had a series of being fired, and then I worked in an auto plant on the assembly line for 3 years, and improved my Spanish, and also learned a lot about unions, and I got injured on the job, and I just thought, it's time for me to get a skill, because I'm going nowhere. And actually the plant I was in closed shortly thereafter, So I tried a few different trades, and electrical really suited me. I worked as a truck driver for a utility, which was, I kind of dressed in drag so that people thought I was a male.
Mhm.
And
How'd that work? Did
it
they
worked
buy
out okay. It worked out okay. Yeah, it was fun.
Good.
And I worked in residential, non-union, and that was really rough. It was really hard work, and it's very demeaning. People get treated very poorly. It depends on the contractor, but I think in general, it's it's hard work, and it's not well paid,
Mhm.
especially if it's not unionized. And then I got a job in a refinery and worked there for 3 years. I was a maintenance electrician and journeyed out. And I started, and I also came out as a lesbian. That was it. No more.
How'd you do that? Did you just
Uh,
say, I'm not gonna this, or
no, I had my first sort of more steady relationship, and moved into a apartment with a few other lesbians.
Hmm.
And we had we lived in Long Beach. So I moved to California right after college.
Mhm.
I forgot. I did have a lesbian relationship when I was in getting my master's in history in Austin, Texas, where I went to school.
Mhm.
But my partner was also kind of a problematic person, and kind of recluse, and but she started hitting me, and losing her temper and breaking all the glass.
Oh,
And I decided to leave.
good.
That was when I went to California,
Uh-huh.
and I stayed with my brother and sister-in-law for a few weeks, and then my sister-in-law freaked out and slapped me and called me sick. You're sick, sick, sick. And she had 2 kids at the time who I was taking care of, and I don't know, she freaked out. She is a temperamental person,
Mhm.
so it was her thing. I knew that, and I found somebody to stay with for a week, and then I got a job in a college dormitory as a warden for the dormitory.
Really?
So I got room and board and paid,
Right.
and then that's when I started working in factories again, because I worked in Austin, in Texas, as in a boat factory too. At any rate, so but in the early 80s, I got into a relationship that was more stable, and it didn't last. It lasted a few years, and I also was in a lesbian community, and our house was sort of the house. It was a lesbian street. There was like what we called the Dyke Dorm down the street. And
That was a good
so
place.
it was an affirming kind of community. And
Do you think that you were drawn to some of these what became difficult relationships because you were trying to help the person?
yeah,
I'm saying this is a common lesbian direction that doesn't work too well.
that's right.
Yeah. I remember somebody saying, I really don't believe people are good. You are wrong. That is, so then you set out to change that direction for that person. You can't.
Well, I don't exactly think. I think it's a two-way street. I mean, I also was looking for some kind of break with kind of the normal with normality. And the women, I liked women who were different, who were, who didn't fit in, who had spirit, so it maybe early on it was about thinking that in fact, I got involved with my first crush because she wasn't doing well in chemistry, and our teacher said, would anyone like to tutor her? And I said I would, and we soon dropped the chemistry angle. And she was so well read. She was really well read in poetry and theater and philosophy. So, that's what I mean.
She was interesting in many ways.
Yeah, yeah. She helped me,
Right.
It was a two-way street. So, and I, also, the whole middle class mentality of, what's right, how you live your life. I didn't like that, and I didn't know how to get out of it. So that's another thing that people helped me with.
Right.
Anyway, I became an electrician, and in the 80s, I worked in construction. I moved from the refinery to construction because it was less toxic. It was still dangerous, but it was, you weren't breathing chemicals, so you didn't know about. And I also got into film, to video, and I studied video, public access. So I took advantage of the opportunities to get free classes, and I was very creative. So my interest in writing, I kept journals throughout this time.
Do you still?
No. Now I write articles.
I see. That's fine.
Yeah, I miss the other kind of
journaling
and writing fiction. But yeah, so I've gone into more stable relationships. So I've kind of had a lot of different relationships over my lifetime with different women, and kind of looking for ones that were more positive, more affirming.
Were many of them women in the trades?
A few of them were. Not all, no, but most of them were working class women. And a lot of them were artists, visual artists, pretty much, and ceramicists, and then maybe just one woman who was in the trades.
How long have you been in your current relationship?
24 years.
Yes, very good. Congratulations.
Yeah, so I was in a relationship for 9 years. So again, just to finish my chronology, I was an electrician on it, pretty much solid for about 10 years. And then my hair was getting gray, and I was teaching the apprenticeship program. And I liked teaching, but I also felt like it was sort of confining, because it was run almost on a military basis. This is the syllabus, and this is how you do it. And I didn't find that it was as flexible as I would have liked to have seen it. And I also was, more interested in making films. And I was doing some filming for the union. This is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And so one of them accused me of, one of the people in the training trust accused me of, sucking the tits of the union. And I thought, well, you know what, this isn't really working out. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I started teaching, and I got a job. I had a master's, and I got lucky, and I got hired teaching in a community college, and I did that for a little bit. And then the dean of another school said to me, you know, you're really never going to get a permanent job in this if you're interested, unless you get a PhD. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try that. So I applied to 3 different places, and I got into one. And I really didn't know what the hell I was doing.
You were trying to follow her instruction,
I was.
her advice, right?
Yeah, but I didn't know what I should get it.
Get the PhD in, right?
And so I ended up going to politics and society at UC Irvine, and the department there was disappointing. Not many women were teaching there. It was like kind of a 1950s version of political science, more on voting and a little bit on political theory. But I wanted to do my work on policy and on affirmative action. And I couldn't find anyone to work with. And then finally, you know, someone agreed to work with me, the only Mexican American in the department. But he didn't know anything about it either, and he was a demographer. It was a little, you know, challenging, but I finally did get some mentorship. There were some new women professors came into the department and helped me get through my dissertation, and I studied women, race and gender in hiring and construction. And I worked with 3 different construction projects. So that was great. I was able to really bring my experience into my profession, my research. And the funny thing is, Diane, that's, you know, for years, people were like, you're such a misfit. You know, you're a factory worker, you're an electrician, you know, and now you're a professor. It's so, you know, disconnected. And now
you use that word, misfit, or they
they were like surprised. How does somebody
get a PhD?
Yeah. And but now my experience as a trade unionist, as a factory worker, has become my calling card, because I have the experience behind my words. Yes. Right. And I did also brought in, I finally got a job as a professor, well, assistant professor, full-time tenure track in a 4-year university in 2005 in Los Angeles, and was thrilled.
I bet. Where was that?
At Cal State Dominguez Hills.
Many lesbians work there.
Yeah, where I still work.
Interviewed several of them, right?
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I first worked there, when I first came there, it was very homophobic.
Was it?
Yes. And so I met Greg, who was still, you know, was the director of the archives at that time. And I met an outgoing lesbian activist, Sharon Raphael.
I've met her.
Okay. And she had, you know, been active and started the Lesbian and Gay Staff Association, Faculty and Staff Association. So we brought the film.
Was it Brokeback Mountain?
Yes, that's it. Brokeback Mountain.
It's all there. It's just a matter of when it's going to come out.
Right. Exactly. So we brought the writer from that movie to town, and it really helped. I mean, it just kind of broke the ice, and you know, we had every lesbian and gay in the area came, and but you know, really prior to that, there was, you know, it was very homophobic, and there were professors on campus who, you know, kind of chastised gay people in their classrooms, and it was, not, it was, and that was okay. It was very Christian,
Mhm.
very Christian dominant, very kind of homophobic Christian dominant. And the head of the Multicultural Center wanted to create the safe spaces training, this kind of training that says, if you want to be a mentor or just a person who lesbian and gay people can turn to, here's the training, then you can put something on your door. And that helped kind of break the ice also.
Yeah, that's a big effort. That's a big contribution.
It is. It really is. And
Statement, yeah.
and then, other people kind of picked up from there. And now, 17 years later, we have a queer resource center. We have a lot of lesbians and gays that walk around holding hands on campus.
Hey, that's great.
It's just a huge cultural shift. So I'm really happy about that. And at one point, one lesbian student came to my door and said, "There's no classes on queer studies in this campus." So I started the first one that I know of. I mean, Sharon might have had one. It was just called International Perspectives on LGBTQ. And, we've kept it going all these years, but there's been more, a few more since then. And, the Women's Studies Department has now become a department, not just a program. And I got more involved in labor studies. So labor studies was,
That's it, right.
yeah, it was an orphan. Nobody was claiming it, and then it got put in the business school, and they didn't really want it, and so I took it over.
They couldn't define it, I'm sure.
Well, it actually was a program that started in the 1980s, and it had, kind of had some strong leadership to the 90s, and then things, were kind of petered out, and then they stuck it in the business school, and so that was a problem. So I kind of have been nurturing it, and I'm very proud of my work on elevating labor studies to a more prominent position in the university. It had no faculty in it. I was working on it through my other department, interdisciplinary studies. I was able to coordinate it, but we had no faculty who were hired in that department. And now we have two full-time faculty members, and they're wonderful. And for the last 13 years, we've had an annual labor, social, environmental justice fair where we've brought together community groups and labor groups, labor unions, workers' centers, as well as artists and musicians and theater people. And we've worked with the art department and the sociology department and the teaching school of education. I brought hundreds of high school students in, and we've dealt with things like LGBTQ issues on the job, as the spectrum of different kinds of issues. So it's been very wonderful to have this career.
That education, as we knew it, as we grew up into it, and thought that we should be engaging ourselves in, is totally going to change. That what's appropriate to educate people in is, it's fine, you get your bachelor's or your master's, but what are you going to do with it? So I think that things, of course, I'm a friend of Pat Williams, and the trades, and it makes sense for people. And so I think that all that education stuff is going to come down a little bit, and this other is going to raise, because I just see it. That's where we're going. That's where we have to go. And we can have a bunch of people with degrees in communication not talking.
Well, I've kind of gone the opposite direction, and the fact that I started, more with manual trades, and I've gone into education, but I'm trying to integrate them. And I think that there's an importance in having a critical mind, in
Mhm.
in studying things that are not immediately apparently applicable, because they can become applicable. I mean, I think poetry and,
Right.
theater, might be hard to make a living, but I think that they add to your whole understanding of the world and your life.
Mhm.
So I think we need to treasure and value any occupation that that we need. And knowledge creation is also important. And now I'm involved with labor and climate change. So
Mhm.
my wife, we've gotten married. We got married in Canada before it was legal in the United States.
Uh-huh.
And that was a funny story because the way they do it in Canada is you have to get somebody from a bank, um, or you can do it, through other kinds of secular commissions. Read you the vows.
Uh,
And we arranged, I was going to a tradeswoman conference in Vancouver, and I proposed on the plane,
Good for you.
and I had already planned, our honeymoon, which was going to be we were going to take a seaplane to Vancouver Island,
Mhm.
and then fly back and get, I think we were going to get married and then fly to Vancouver Island. And it was very romantic. It was wonderful.
Sure.
And then we went to the tradeswoman conference, and there were a lot of lesbians there, and it was
Very
you know,
affirming.
it was affirming for her and me.
Mhm.
So really a very nice event, and we felt lucky, that we were able to do that
Mhm.
in Canada.
Did you
And
remarry here?
no, and actually you cannot remarry
I wonder
unless
about that. Right. How come?
you have to get divorced first.
Really?
We're legally married.
Yeah.
You
So do you get all in terms of applying, your income tax, get all the benefits for a married couple
yeah,
that
yeah,
are in this country?
that's right.
Good.
And I mean, we had another celebration at Suzanne's mom's house.
Mhm.
Um, my mother had just passed away, and I had all of her scarves, and we created
Uh,
a lovely background, um, and got married. And in fact, that my mother was, continued to be very homophobic, and she died at 102 and a half. But
Wow, she hung on to that a long time.
yeah, but the last few years she relented and got to know my wife, and my wife was just so wonderful to her and
That's great.
loving and helpful, and she told her that she loved her too.
Great.
So that was
Mm.
wonderful to happen. But yeah, so my wife was, very interested in climate change, and so I decided to incorporate labor and climate change, and I designed a class on labor and the environment, and started doing research and in unions and what people were doing around climate change. And I wrote a Fulbright proposal, and I got it, and I went to we together we went to England. And
That's the trip that you recently came back from?
No,
That's
so
good.
that kind of launched my international career.
I see.
So in 2018 I taught at the University of Liverpool, and then I lectured in Germany and in Norway and in
Mm.
Netherlands and
Wow.
throughout
So was
England.
Suzanne with you?
Yes.
Great. Great.
So that was wonderful too. And I met a lot of people, learned a lot more about
uh,
the different ways unions address climate change, and kind of the possibilities of having, say, an environmental audit on the job that workers perform, and how workers can include contract issues, clauses, that have to do with having a better environment, so health and safety concern, but also dealing with, warming. Like if you're in a uh, hot area, you have to work outside. How do you include something like that in your contract negotiations and
That's a good idea.
protection?
Mhm.
Um,
What do you suggest we do regarding climate change?
Well, I think we have to phase out fossil fuel, and we have to, look at renewables as a entire life cycle issue. We can't just go into green growth without understanding that we do have to change. We have to cut our consumption, and we have to think about how to recycle any kind of products that we use, whether it's solar panels or wind turbines or plastic. We need to change everything about our society.
Do you think that will happen?
Yes, I
Are you
do.
hopeful? Right, good.
I'm hopeful, but I think it's, really a political nightmare.
Yeah.
And we're already in climate change. So,
like it or not.
yeah. But I'm involved with a number of projects now. Like I'm involved in a climate literacy project in Canada, working with the construction trades. And there my background became very useful because I've taught apprenticeship as well. And I'm working with the international team from Europe and Canada to look at best practices around climate instruction, climate education, and vocational training. How do you raise the awareness of workers around climate change so that they can also use their own talents and resources to solve problems on the job, and to think about the materials that they use and think about the waste, and then also kind of weigh in on the positions that their unions take regarding carbon capture or regarding nuclear power or fossil fuel, because the most the unions that are more reluctant to change are the ones that are dependent on refineries for work. And it's understandable because we don't really have a plan for good paying jobs in other areas.
Right. No options.
So this is how broad a plan we really need. We need, the Green New Deal was sort of an attempt at thinking more broadly and deeply about how to change our system of life and what kind of priorities our government should make. But as we just saw with the,
do you think in schools that they should put classes in the elementary schools that are commensurate with that idea that climate change is here to stay?
I think that's happening in a lot of places. I think it's the only problem is that just like critical race theory or anything about Black history, I mean, it's being attacked, right? So I think certainly most young people I know, and I have to admit I don't know a lot of young people in the red states, but most young people I've met are very knowledgeable about and worried and concerned and thoughtful about climate change. So, and they're very involved. Yeah,
right.
And they are, I think classes, schools have incorporated it so that there's more awareness, but still we don't have the practical directions that we can take to make a difference. What do you do? I think recycling, it's just sort of not enough. Like, right. Be conscious of whether you're buying plastic. We really need to demand that, our industries change and find ways to make that happen. And, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
That sounds like you're hopeful, which is encouraging.
Yeah, I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
And they say, despair is a privilege of the rich. And
That's interesting. Yeah.
You have to be hopeful. You have to find a way. And, you know, again, I think this is my background that I mean, what were my family thinking? You know, my father was arrested and beat up. Some of my uncles were, you know, survived the concentration camps. I mean,
Amazing.
you know, you go through that kind of experience and you know that only hope can keep you alive.
Mhm. So what's your favorite fairy tale?
I don't think I really read fairy tales. I was brought up on Grimm's. Oh, I used to, they weren't my favorite, but
You read them.
there was Augustus who used to play with matches and he burnt his house down.
They were grim.
They were grim.
Right.
So I had a lot of boxes in my garage because I was involved in a lot of organizations. I helped, haven't talked about, but I helped start a women's caucus and the Electricians, the Electric Women. I was involved in a group called Winter Women in Non-Traditional Employment Roles. And I, you know, it also had been involved as an editor for Lavender Wave, a lesbian newsletter that in 1980s. So again, I kept all this material, and because I knew it was precious.
I agree with it, right?
And after meeting Greg, he asked me, you know, what, you know, do you have anything for the archives? And I told him about my treasures. He was enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And so and we also at the same time, I talked to Pat and two other women, Lynn Shaw, who was also an electrician, and I worked with closely in some of these different organizations, and Lupe, who was involved with the, I think it was the pile drivers. And we thought about starting the Tradeswomen Archives because we all had material in our garages that we'd been hoarding all these years. And we thought it was important as a way to preserve women's history.
Right.
And we thought, you know, I knew from my dissertation, you know, how important archives were too. I'd gone to New York to the Temament Temament Library, and they had like a few boxes about women's organizations in the trades, and they were so valuable to me. And I thought, well, I've accumulated all this material. I actually didn't mention that I've made 3 feature films. One called Hammering It Out.
Good title.
Yeah, on women in the trades in the United States, focusing on Los Angeles. One called Transnational Tradeswomen, which was about tradeswomen in India, where women have done work in the building sector for hundreds of years. And I traveled all over Asia, interviewing and videotaping.
Wow, you've had a really interesting life.
I have.
Yeah, it's great.
And then I made another film with
You should be a tour guide to all these places.
Yeah. My mother said that. And then I made a film about the Bracero program, the guest worker program that brought Mexican workers into the United States in the 1940s through the 1960s and exploited the hell out of them and kind of created the foundation for the undocumented flow of undocumented workers and the, impoverishment of Mexico through NAFTA. And and we interviewed braceros in California and Texas and Mexico. So I had also that material.
You're now fluent in Spanish, right?
I have, I learned Spanish
Right.
in college, and then I'm not fluent.
No.
Long shot. I can hold up a conversation in Spanish.
That's good.
I'm working on my Norwegian. That was where I just came from. So, so anyway, the archives really grew out of our joint interests in putting the materials from our lives into a safe place where activists and researchers and students could use them. And so it's been wonderful, to have that resource and have that.
So where is it?
So it's in the at Dominguez Hills.
Okay, that's good.
And it's called the Tradeswoman Collection. We got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to start it off, and had a symposium with a number of prominent librarians and archivists from around the country, and had a digital resource page for a while. And we've had tradeswomen groups come in, and we've had exhibits that were drawn from the library archives. We've also traveled to different archival functions, and made presentations. So it's been really valuable, and it's already been used by researchers.
That's great.
As well. And in terms of my international work, I mentioned, Liverpool, and I was able to, after that, I kind of built this international network, and I realized that I was interested in continuing that. And I looked online to see if there were any projects that were dealing with workers, because I don't want to just do research from books or from documents or theoretical papers, or just talk to leaders. I want to hear from workers. I want to do participatory research with workers. And so I founded an organization, a university group in Norway that was doing that with oil workers. And so they just started, and I wrote to them and said I was interested, and told them a little bit myself. And so I was interviewed by the leader of this group, and it was wonderful. It was we felt like we meshed right away.
That's great.
He was a human geographer professor, very kind of a gentle soul, but also extremely organized and knowledgeable. And but it was funny because I was in a Airbnb when we were first talking, Skyping.
Right.
My first interview with this Norwegian, professor who didn't know me at all, and I was trying to see if I could get involved in their organization. And I did not realize that, when you Skype, your background is so important. So I was perfectly situated behind these horns that were hanging. And at the end of the discussion, he said,
by the way,
could I ask you why you have horns?
Right. What? And your answer was?
What? I looked behind me. We had a good laugh about that. But yeah, and so I have been. I've gone to Norway several times. I've been involved in the conferences. We're also making a film together. We showed a preliminary piece of that film, and it was a interview with a Nigerian oil worker whom we've been getting to know, because one of the professors has been doing research in Nigeria for many years, and a American who is a guy I've known for a while, and a Norwegian. And so, we had a conference recently, and now we're going to continue our work together. So
That's great.
That's been good, really good. You know, I could talk about other things, but you get the
No, I
idea.
think, yeah, this has been good. Gives a really good idea.
Again, I was kept in mind the idea that you're, you know, that I'm in a way, we're talking to young women
Mhm.
who may be thinking about what they're going to do in the future,
Right.
and how they can follow their passions or
To
explore.
know that someone else has done it. You know, that's,
Right.
it is possible, right?
Yes. And it's, you don't know which path you're going to follow or where a path is going to lead you. And I think that's the lesson my
Mhm.
career has for people, is that I've done a few zigs and zags, but it's all come together.
Right. And I think what you said earlier about hope is very important. So if you can give somebody hope by just having them go into the archives and read about this, and read about you and other women, you could save a life. So
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate
thank you.
it. Same here, Diane. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.